This week I'm joined with
Joyce Deranas.
Joyce, I'm so happy to have you here today. You have a lot of books to talk about. You've got 3 books you're going to talk about today. So right. I want to hear about what's your newest book and what are some of the other books that you've written also.
My newest book is Anna's Wish. It's book 3 of my series, A Klondike Gold Rush Miner's Life. And it's about the first wife of my great uncle, Romeo.
And what about your other books? What are they about?
Okay, so these are my 3 books. The Long Shot is the first one. Becca's Kiss is the second, and Anna's Wish is the third one. So with my first book, I detail a 4,000-mile walk on foot by 2 men, my grandfather here and his older brother. So to get an idea of that book, let me play my book trailer. With this book, I detailed the 1907 journey of two brothers, Nazaire and Raoul Poulin, these 2 here way on the right. This one's my grandfather. So this is a photo of 5 brothers that I fell in love with. I fell in love with their generation. So they walk from Quebec diagonally across Canada and get to Dawson for the purpose of digging gold. When they get there, these 2 brothers way over here, Romeo and Godias, are already there, and they've been there pre-1900. So when you look at Canada and the world and what's happening around 1896, when the Klondike Gold Rush came on the scene, Canada was trying to fill their prairies. They wanted to increase exports. And so this particular broadside on the right side appeared in every major newspaper in the world. And Canada had, over a period of 10 years, put out one broadside after another, giving land. Either you paid $10 for a homestead of 160 acres, you paid 20 and you got 2 homesteads side by side touching, good for a farmer and an older boy. Eventually they gave a free homestead to anyone who was British, and then eventually with what land was left. It was probably bad land, maybe water nearby, or but eventually they gave the rest of the land free at that point. So right about the time that the Klondike Gold Rush happened in the world, Canada was trying to pull people into their country. So this is an idea of all the people and how much new immigrants were coming into Canada at the time. It really spiked a little beyond the gold rush. So my two men in my first book traveled from Quebec, which is up number 1, and made all their way over to Dawson, which is over here, number 22, walked 4,000 miles on foot. They crossed through the prairies, and when they did, they saw fruits and vegetables that they had never heard of, never imagined was growing. So once the prairies took off and was populated, this is a list of the type of vegetables coming out. Now, at the time, if we go back to Seattle, Washington, which is where the impact of the Klondike Gold Rush really hit the world, Seattle is selling these miners' kits. Every miner needed a kit if they were going to come in. And so it was a whole lot of things they had to have, probably weighed about a ton anyway. And that's if they didn't have any animals. If they had a horse, they also needed to have the feed for that horse for a year. This is what a miner's kit looks like once your kit is off the ship and you're on shore. This is an idea of the mess you had to drag up either the White Pass or the Kiltrip Pass, and keep track of what's yours, and hope no one takes, 5 or 6 bags or boxes that are yours. So people ask me, well, where is the Yukon? What has that got to do with so here is a map of Canada and all the various territories and provinces. And this white outlined area here is Alaska. So to give you an idea, the Yukon is 186,000 square miles and Alaska is 663. So, small little triangle here. The Yukon happens to be above the 60th parallel. So that's this dotted line here. And because it is above this dotted line, it does not have the typical 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours of nighttime that our average day has. They have an exaggerated time where in summertime, the sun never sets. At midnight or 2 in the middle of the night, it's you can just walk around it. You can see very easily. But in the winter months, November, December, January, February, it is constantly gray, day and night, and so it's pretty much 4 months of the year in an immense daylight and 8 months of twilight. The Yukon River in total is almost 2,000 miles long. And so stampeders would make their way down to Whitehorse and then have quite a ways to go before they would hit right here by the Klondike River, where Dawson was, where the gold fields were. So this is an idea of this chart gives you an idea of how many hours of sunlight and darkness that the year had when you were above the 60th parallel. That's why the Yukon is called the land of the midnight sun, because at midnight you can have sun in summertime. It makes for an explosive growing season in the summer months. And the rivers, once they start to freeze, lock up all transportation by water for 8 months of the year. When the gold miners bought a claim, if it was a creek claim, which means they were probably working with their feet in water a lot of the time, they either used what was called a rocker or a miner's cradle. And here are a couple examples of what they look like. And this stick that is sticking up, you hold in your hand and you rock that cradle back and forth and back and forth. And the gold, which weighs more than water, follows and is caught by what's called riffles, which are slanted boards. And that's how you separate the dirt from the gold. It does a very good job if you are pouring water at a particular volume. You can't be sloshing water in there too fast, so you'd lose all your gold. Now, if you worked with the crew, then you use what was called sluice boxes, these long boxes that went on and zigzagged. And that's if you had a crew of, 10 or 15, 20 guys. And the picture on the left gives you an example of these riffles that catch the gold. So that's how the gold is separated. And here is a picture of the most famous dredge in the world, dredge number 4. It's a big monster. It doesn't look it, but this is 8 stories high. Yeah, it doesn't look it at all. So you have this big, long head here. It is a rotating belt, and all these, I'll show you the next slide. You have a rotating belt here, and you have a bucket line. These buckets head down, and they're picking up permafrost. They're picking up what's called pay dirt. It's dirt where the gold has not been separated out yet. Each bucket is big enough to hold about 8 people standing up. So it's a pretty big operation, pretty noisy. When the miners were in Dawson, to protect everyone from people stealing food or overeating, you would order your food before the rivers froze up around August, and they would be stored in these very, very long warehouses. And you were allowed to come into town one day a month where you got 1 month's worth of whatever you wanted, candles, soup, whatever you had ordered. And this way, they ensured that no one stole or, were tempted to steal someone else's food. And this way, no one starved. So in other words, your food was monitored. So that's an idea of this first story, The Long Shot, where 2 brothers walked 4,000 miles in the hope of finding gold. Book number 2 is about a Tliget Indian, a maiden, unmarried woman, who lived in Ketchikan, Alaska, in a Tliget community, a community of Tliget Indians. Now, there are coastal Tligets, and that's the kind of Indian that is in Alaska, making their living off the ocean and off rivers, so they're probably fishing. And then there are inland Tligets, which live below Whitehorse in the Yukon, which is a little below Whitehorse. So this is the book trailer for Becca's Kiss. brothers, Romeo and Godias, the ones who left home at 12 and 13 years old and were making their way in the world, ended up, after a number of years, ended up in Skagway, Alaska, where they were blasting stone to make tunnels for the Pacific Railway. And they heard about the Klondike Gold Rush. They were at the right place at the right time. So they met up with this Indian, this old man, and a Tliget Indian who was from Carcross. He's an inland Tliget. They're a little different. Dialogue is a little different. Their customs a little different over the centuries. And the Indian said, "Hey, if you guys help me out, I've got a bum foot. I'm having problems walking. If you help me out, I'll help me catch a moose and bring it back to my cabin, and I'll give you half the moose." At the time, men walking to Dawson from Skagway didn't know that there was an extreme shortage of food where they were going, and there would be no food all along the way. So many men, it happened, starved. A lot of people don't realize that. So this Tliget Indian actually kept these two guys alive that first winter. So the old man ended up moving to Ketchikan, Alaska, where it was a more comfortable life. He wasn't in the cold part of the Yukon. It was warmer there by the coast of Alaska, and lived with his niece. So to get from where, so this story is about Romeo, this one brother. To get from his claim in Parker Creek down to Ketchikan is almost 1,000 miles. So to get there by Skagway, Alaska, you have to take a ship, or you wouldn't walk it. You'd take a ship. And so a few years Romeo did that, but one year he took a ship, and the ship had actually hit a reef and impaled itself. It was the Princess May. And it's a miracle, first of all, that the ship didn't just slide off the reefs and drown everybody. But everyone did survive. But he ended up not going to visit that year. And he was growing strong feelings for Becca, for this woman. So when he did go back the following year, he discovered that Becca had been kidnapped. So he employed these Tliget Indians in Ketchikan. Please help me find her. What can we do? What can I do? Can I pay someone? He's a miner from the Yukon. He doesn't know any of the area. The area of Ketchikan is on the coast of Alaska. There are hundreds and hundreds of little islands all along the coast of Alaska. Dangerous, you need a boat. You need to know the shoreline. You need to know how to protect yourself. So they end up hiring a Sitka man, a man from Sitka, Alaska, who in his youth was raised in the ways of not only being a Sitka warrior, knowing how to kill your enemy, but also this man learned how the Russians killed the Sitka Indians when they owned Alaska, when they owned this land previously in 1820, 1840, 1780s. So that's that story. So book number 3 is about Anna, who is ends up being the first wife of Romeo. Anna is from Belgium. She came to Dawson with her father and older sister, and within a couple months, she was a prostitute. Within 24 hours, her father disappeared, leaving her and her sister absolutely penniless, with about 100,000 men. So the story of Anna is, as an 18-year-old, she and her father and her older sister from Antwerp take a ship to New York and then cross the United States by the Continental Railway, where they are making their way to Dawson like thousands of other people in the world who want to strike it rich and find gold. She meets up with Romeo Poulin, and they don't really hit it off very well at all. But eventually they do, they marry. But along the way, she's working year after year at one bar room after another, one saloon, one theater after another. So she's always surrounded by alcohol. And to give you an idea of the temperature, this is the temperature. This is a typical winter temperature in 1929, where it's 21 below in the daytime, 59 below at night. It's a cold and dangerous place, and it can be a miserable place to live. So that story details her life. So these are my 3 books.
So did you find a publisher or did you self-publish these books?
No, I self-published all of them, and I will continue to self-publish subsequent ones. I'm working on book 4 now, which is the second wife of Romeo. So he met one woman, Becca, the love of his life, and then he married Anna. And in the next book, he'll meet and marry a woman called Mary. So the next book is coming out this year.
So why did you decide to self-publish instead of go to a publisher?
Control. I was going to say, without thinking about it, if I were younger, but it wouldn't have mattered. I would still, I could be 20 years old and I would self-publish today. There are just so many stories, I think, that people have and that these stories are itching to get out of them. And I would like to get some of these stories out before, while I'm around. So I want to use my time wisely. I think it's a very, very long process, and there's a lot of competition, and self-publishing is very easy. It's extremely easy. Not brain surgery.
Yeah, it's pretty simple.
Yeah.
So what is your story? Where are you from?
I'm from Gardner, Massachusetts. Lived there till I was about 8, 9 years old. We moved to Worcester, and I've pretty much been in Worcester most of my life.
So is there a particular reason why you wanted to be a writer, or?
I come from an unusual family, a very large family. From my grandparents, there were 30 first cousins. So my grandparents had 30 grandchildren, and we all lived most of our youth all around each other and within a few miles of each other. So I have a history of being very, very close to all my cousins, my first cousins. And not until the boys were old enough to go in the service did any of us, leave the area. Today, still, many of these of the living first cousins still live within 10 miles of each other. So I grew up hearing these different stories throughout my life. Of the 30 grandkids, I'm like in the middle, not one of the oldest, not one of the youngest. But I recall being around my grandparents every day of summer vacation in all my youth. So I was with my grandparents. I heard their stories. I asked many questions. And like a lot of people, I inherited my mother's photo collection when she passed away. I also inherited part of my grandmother's photo collection when she passed away. For a few years, I was an active amateur genealogist in my family and grew our family tree on Ancestry for about 10 years. We now have, between both grandparents, 22 and 28 generations, pre-Napoleon France. And, and, and I had so many people, but what I really had was a list of names, and I didn't know who had blue eyes, who was caught stealing, who walked with a limp. So these people, these multiple generations, over 5,000 people, they weren't alive to me, but not until I started writing them and researching what they went through. And I ended up falling in love with the five brothers. One of the photos I showed at the beginning, so that was my grandfather and his brothers. And these guys lived in a time where, participating in the gold rush was a once in a lifetime adventure, and it was dangerous. I mean, it's a miracle that they all lived, that they all, the two that left in 1907 in my first book, it's a miracle that they made it back home alive. They happened along the way to have met with maybe 15 different Indian groups, some of them aggressive, didn't want anything to do with white men. The Indians were losing their way of life at that time. And, just being on the road, being on foot, having to survive all that time, sleep out every night, never get bitten by a rattlesnake, never being robbed, so they lived through these extraordinary times. And today, what are the chances that any of us, have these challenges that existed back then? We have our creature comforts. We're very set in our ways in our urban homes, but we don't know what it is to pitch a tent and to walk through a tent city with, before you hit a dirt road, a crossroads with 3 wooden buildings, and that's the whole town, So
long story short, you heard your family's history, and that's what inspired you to want to write it all down.
Yep.
So what do you do professionally, or what did you do professionally?
Oh, I was a technical writer in software security.
Okay, and now you're doing a different type of writing, which is
Yes. Yeah.
cool. What is your goal as a writer, and what milestone would you like to reach with your writing?
Well, I would like to leave some solid footprints for the future, not necessarily only for my family, but just to record, the flavor of what happened and I'm really cemented in this, the time frame of 1880 to 1940. I'm in love with this time period and all the changes that were happening in the world. The world was going from an agricultural revolution to an industrial revolution, and that really had an enormous impact on people.
That's very. I think the Gilded Age is a very interesting time to focus on. So that's really cool. That's really, you want to, I guess, lay the path down for future generations. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So I believe you are involved with Seven Bridge, right?
Yes, I am.
So what is your history with Seven Bridge?
Okay, well, they're most certainly my second family. Seven Bridge Writers Collaborative in Lancaster offers many workshops and classes and special events. and many of them are free. It's an enormous amount of resources. The people there, the teachers there are fabulous. And I really owe it to them to have helped me find my voice, helped me really hone my skills and be able to really, reach out and write in the way that I want to. It's one thing to want to write. It's another to be able to write well, or at least attempt to write well. And they've helped me very much.
So obviously you've had teachers and everything, but I didn't know, do you have a specific person that's influenced you, I guess, literary?
Yeah, I do. I have a few special people I really fall in love with. So when I was doing a lot of the Canadian research on the prairies and how the prairies grew, I fell in love with this guy, Wallace Stegner. He's passed away now, but he wrote a lot of books. He's from Saskatchewan, Canada, and he wrote a lot of books about the prairies, like 1910, 1920s, how farms and ranches were disappearing. People lived through droughts, and so his writing style was absolutely wonderful. He was writing about the disappearance of the frontier of the Canadian prairies. So it was becoming very populated by the 20s, and and so the face of the whole 2,000 miles is what you consider the Canadian prairies. So he wrote about the changes he saw. At one time, in fact, when my grandfather and his brother in book one were walking through the prairies, some of the townships they walked through had up to 15,000 wild horses. They weren't even horses owned by farmers. They were just wandering around. That was one township. So Wallace Stegner captured a lot of the Indian losing their way of life, of the changing face of animals that were there, and homesteads, and how people lived. People were very frugal. They lived with, they didn't waste a thing.
Yeah, no, I do. You had to be like that back then.
Right.
And you said, was there somebody else besides?
Yeah, when I did my research an amount of my research was also done in Vermont, because the next series I'm going to write about will be about my grandfather taking the money he earned from the gold mine and buying a farm in Vermont, and that moved his family to Vermont. So to do research for that, I wanted to write a lot about Vermont, and they lived in what's called the Northeast Kingdom, which is the whole upper part of Vermont. So Howard Frank Mosher is the champion of writing about the Northeast Kingdom. He writes about very pastoral time in Vermont's history. Where people were comfortable. They lived off the land. They were poor, of course. Things were not easy. There were no large cities up there, very few large cities. So, everyone was kind of a hick, kind of a farmer. And Moshe does a beautiful job expressing a lot of that time. So I read an awful lot of him as I was researching to start this next series.
Is there anyone else, or is it just those two people?
No, so for fun, I read John Sanford, which is all detective series, which is all crime in Minnesota and So that's all with his series are with Virgin Flowers, or with the Flowers head boss, who is Lucas Davenport, who is a police lieutenant. So that's what I do. That's what I read for fun.
You read the crime stuff, even though you don't write crime. That's okay. I totally
No,
I get that. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we wrap this up?
no, that's it. That's it.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you, Joyce. I've had a great time. I feel like I've learned so much about, Canada and things that I just never thought that we would talk about. So I really appreciate it. Do you have any social media or ways that people can buy your book?
Yes, my books are available on Amazon, Kobo, Barnes and Nobles, the Apple Store, and can learn more at my website, joycederanas.com.
Well, thank you, Joyce. It's been a pleasure. This has been Book Talk. I've been Buffy Catella, and we will see you guys later.